And this has been a discussion that's been ongoing for a while. I think it may be now reaching a boiling point. I brought up the situation just before news. 4 Ontario school boards getting together last week to sue some of the big social media companies, alleging they know their services are addictive and harmful to young people, and they do nothing to deal with that. Then there are other jurisdictions contending those same companies may partly be to blame for the increase even in diagnoses of mental illness. And there have been calls, including here in Quebec, for the banning of cell phones in schools altogether. But our next guest wonders whether these measures are the most constructive way to deal with the problem overall. Her new book is called Growing Up in Public, Coming of Age in a Digital World. Dr. DEVORAH Heitner is on the line. Doctor, thanks so much for being with us this afternoon.
Thank you.
I would ask the question then, if this is not the most constructive way, and it doesn't seem constructive, it seems destructive, obviously, to be suing these companies, but people have kind of reached a point where I think they don't know what else to do. So what, in your estimation, what is a more constructive way to deal with this?
Well, I do understand user frustration, right? I do get why people are frustrated with Instagram and Snapchat and TikTok. And as educators, as parents, anyone who works with kids, coaches, scouting, we all need to lean into helping kids balance their lives, making sure kids have some practice interacting in person, that they can take breaks from interacting in digital spaces. And we need to help them figure out how to navigate safely in digital spaces, because it's not like when they get to the workforce, everything's going to be in person. They're going to be on Slack. They're going to be in digital communities. So we also need to help them navigate those digital communities safely and thoughtfully and have some perspective there.
I will point out, so I know in the article that I read, you said these are fear-driven decisions, right? And as you're just alluding to now, can get in the way of building trust. But you understand at the same time, you have a child, and you know what this is like. You have a high schooler, I think.
Yes.
A lot of parents will look at this and say, I don't know enough about this. When I was growing up, this wasn't an issue, and I don't have enough information to be able to deal with this. So what is the way to deal with it if you find yourself in that situation?
You don't really get to choose dealing with it, right? You may not want to, but it's just like those difficult conversations about alcohol or drugs or sex, coming of age, anything. We have to talk with our kids, and we have to hear where they are. So if they're saying, all my friends are on Discord, or all my friends are on Instagram, or all my friends are using Snapchat, we don't have to say yes and give the green light, but we certainly need to know a little bit more about, how else could your child make plans if they're not going to use the communication methods that most kids their age are using. And if they are using those methods, how does your kid feel? The statistics don't matter in your family as much as how your individual children or teenagers might be doing. If your kid is using, for example, Snapchat mostly just to make plans and direct message, and they're not finding it to be harmful or stressful, then you can cross that off your list of worries and maybe focus on making sure they're getting their sleep at night, that they're unplugging and putting away their phone. If they are using social media in a way that's making them feel left out, if they're being bullied, those are conversations we have to have. And you don't have to have a PhD in Snapchat or Discord to be able to talk to your kids about feeling left out, feeling body image pressure, some of the other things that can come up.
So this is not a none or an all or none sort of a situation, right? Because too much restriction is not serving your kids either.
It's very likely, especially with older teens, that if you do too much restriction, they'll go around you, and it won't be that difficult for them to do that. And then they're not as safe, because it's best if you have some idea that they're in these digital spaces, and then they can come to you if there's an issue like being harassed, for example, or dealing with unwanted, someone contacting them in an unwanted way or being gross or whatever. You want them to be able to tell you, and they won't tell you if they've lied to you to get the app, for example. And so you're putting your kid in a situation where they might actually be more vulnerable if you don't have any idea that what's going on, or they don't feel like they can talk with you safely.
Right. So that's a negative consequence of restricting it altogether. I understand that. And then you also write, before you monitor, be a mentor. What does that mean?
Mentoring is also looking at our own behavior and what kind of behavior with smartphones and other tech are we modeling, and leaning into just having those conversations like, oh, I was following too closely my book sales on Amazon, but it was making me a little crazy, so I decided to check it only once a month, right? Just talking with our kids about that, saying, oh, I posted something and no one responded. It made me feel kind of embarrassed. Being honest about those experiences, or when we see everyone else on vacation and we're not, how that feels, and talking about what we did to feel better as well, not to paint ourselves as, oh, I feel victimized by social media, but okay, I'm going to take a break and do something that does make me feel good, or I'm going to choose to use this in a different way. That's really helpful, talking to kids about solutions and asking them what they do to feel better. If, for example, they're scrolling an app and it makes them feel left out, what are some choices that they have? We want to remind our kids that they do have choices and they're not running, the apps aren't running their lives, they're running the app, and they can always take a break.
I have two questions. Number one, you're the parent, and then your child obviously sees you, and you may not be on Snapchat or on TikTok, but you're on something else, as you described, scrolling for whatever reason it happens to be. Does that in and of itself set a bad example? You're not going to tell your child, you should only be doing this. I'm the adult in the room. I know what I'm doing, but you should not be on your social media apps as much as you are.
Well, I would then take a break. I mean, I do think our kids don't know what we're doing. So obviously if you're working, and so many of us are working from home these days, you can let your kid know, okay, I'm working, I'm, on the company Slack, I'm answering work emails. But we should also do as much as we can to contain that to the work day and not just be doing it at all hours. Our parents mostly had more contained work hours than we do now, and I think it's important to let work be work. And when we're with our families, really be present with them, not have our phones out at dinner, et cetera. So, yeah, I think if you're looking over the top of your phone, telling your kid to get off their phone, you are in a less strong position.
Yeah.
Not that the rules have to be the same for you and your 13 or 15-year-old, but in some ways, that's not really the moment. You obviously want to be putting your phone down if you're asking them to do the same.
There's also this idea, and it's funny, I remember talking about this not that long ago, about monitoring your child's, text messages, whatever, spending that time because you know how to be able to do it. That's not necessarily a good thing either, is it, from what we're seeing in studies?
Ideally, we're not monitoring, and especially not covertly monitoring. If we are going to look at our kids' stuff, especially if they're new to using it, maybe you have a grade 6 or grade 7 and they're, 11, 12 years old and they're using for the first time, maybe you say, okay, let's look at this together to see how it's going, or even sometimes younger kids.
Right.
I'm seeing a lot of 10-year-olds on a group text. But I wouldn't covertly monitor, because what are you going to do with what you see? And as your children get older, they need to be able to have conversations with friends that their parents aren't on top of. What if they're complaining about you? We all complained about our parents. It doesn't mean your mom or dad needed a transcript of that conversation.
That's interesting, right? I mean, there's so much they could be saying amongst themselves, and you're right, as they get older, that's the kind of thing you'd expect them to do anyway. I imagine as a parent, if you were monitoring that closely, you might take it a whole lot more personally than we did a generation ago when we complained about our parents.
100%. That's not for you. And sometimes they're also doing that to flex for their friends. So I've talked to parents who, for my book, I talked to a parent who their kid was complaining about a vacation they were on to their boyfriend. Well, of course the kid is going to make it sound like, oh, I miss you so much. It's such a crummy vacation. I'm so bored with my parents. They might be having a good time, but that's not what they're going to say to their sweetheart when they're in high school.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm having such a great time with my parents. It's just not cool to say that. So you have to recognize that some conversations aren't there for you to see, just like you might talk about your children differently with your close friends when your children aren't around, and you would speak of them in front of them.
That's a really good point. So listen, to what I started with, this idea that we now have, and I know in Florida, for example, if I read this right, they're about to pass a law that would actually ban any child, I guess, younger than 14 from even having access to social media sites. This is not a good idea, right? You don't support this idea in any way, do you?
I'm concerned that kids will not be able to reach out for help, for example, in this space that's so important in our society for communication. What if a child is being abused and needs to message a friend? I think banning texting would be even more concerning. I do think social media, there might be a way to try to onboard people later to social media, but I think any time we regulate children's communication and participation in communication, it can make some children less safe, because not every child has a perfect family situation
right.
where their parents are their advocates. And I think it's easy to forget that if you are a caring, lovely parent, that not every kid, has parents like you.
I will say, just as one last thing for parents listening, this idea of setting ground rules and doing it collectively, that's probably the best way to go?
Absolutely. And being in conversation with your kids. Just because I don't think we should ban kids completely from social media doesn't mean I want to see a bunch of 8-year-olds on TikTok either, right? We need to be having conversations, thinking about what it's developmentally appropriate, and also introducing kids to one app at a time, thinking very carefully about who the audience for their posts are. I do think we need to exercise care and thought about our kids' introduction to being part of online communities.
I would just ask one last thing, and maybe this is a bit unfair, but in the U.S., we know from the past couple of weeks there's a move afoot to ban TikTok completely. Now, that's not necessarily because of what it's doing to children, although maybe that's part of it. Their suggestion is it's for security reasons. Do you think that's a good idea or a bad idea?
I think it's going to be tricky. I mean, as an author, TikTok isn't an important part of my presence online, but I know a lot of other authors in the U.S. and around the world are very kind of connected to their audience and their readers on TikTok. So I think it's going to present some hardships for people if that really comes through. What I like to see is kids exercising their own judgment. And I have talked to kids who quit TikTok because it was very, as they put it, addicting. Their words, not mine. Interesting use of addicting, right? Not addictive. They found it hard to walk away from, and some kids did take it off their phone so they could focus on other things. And I think it's great to see kids exercise their own judgment about an app and whether it's a good choice for them.
All right. By the way, for people, do you have a website?
I do. I'm DEVORAHHeitner.com, and my book is on Amazon Canada, growing up in public, and also on. Oh my goodness, what's your digital? It starts with a K. Your digital book space.
We have a store called Indigo.
Yes.
Okay.
It's there too, in all the places.
Okay. So it's online. It's called Growing Up in Public, Coming of Age in a Digital World. Maybe help parents out there. Thank you so much, Dr. Heitner. Appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
Take care. All right. There you go. Again, Growing Up in Public, Coming of Age in a Digital World. If you're at that stage with kids, whatever, where you're trying to figure out how to navigate these social media apps and what they could or should be doing, might be interesting to check that out.